everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I bring to you a first impressions video for Dune Imperium, and this is a game designed by Paul Dennen, who's designed pretty much the entire Clank series. I mean, he's done a couple other things, but his big thing is Clank. From Clank to Clank in Space to the Clank Legacy game, he is Clank. And he has a new game out, it's Dune Imperium. It is themed after the new Dune film, which is yet to be released, directed by Denis Villeneuve, who did stuff like The Arrival and Sicario and what else did he do? The new Blade Runner movie and Prisoners with Hugh Jackman and Terrence Howard. So he's made some really good movies and he has a strong visual sense. So he was probably a good choice for Dune. The interesting thing though is that Dune is designed by one person. Dune the game is designed by one person. So it's just Paul Dennen. It's not like one of these, IP themed games that has like a whole committee of designers on it. Anyway, this is a first impressions video, which means it's not a full teach. It's not a full review. I'm just trying to get a video out for this quickly so that you can take a look at the game, see if it appeals to you. I'm going to give you just enough information to hopefully do that for you quickly. And then I'll come back here to this camera setup and I'll give you my thoughts on the game after one play, actually two plays. Okay, this is the general setup for the board. If you were playing this game normally, you probably would have these cards up here. That's just kind of the market that you'll be buying cards from. But to get everything on camera in this setup, I needed to just kind of run them down the side. Now, before I start, I just kind of wanted to show you some of these character cards. There's about 8 to choose from in the base game. So you're going to have characters that you can play like this one, who's played by Dave Bautista. You can even tell the art looks like him. Timothy Chalamet, who's the lead in the new movie, and Oscar Isaac, who I believe plays Chalamet's father. So these are all characters. There's 8 of them. I'm just showing you these 3 because they had fairly well-known actors that the art was modeled after. But in all of these cases, it's a variable player power game. So everyone's going to have this ongoing power. And then one of the cards that you can play in your starting set of hands is a signet card. And whenever you play that card, you'll also be able to execute this ability here. So just 2 different abilities. They're going to be variable from character to character, from faction to faction. Now, I'm not going to teach you the whole game. I'm not going to explain everything on the board. I will do that when I eventually put out a full teach and review of this game. And I do, in general, like it. But this is essentially 3 mechanics kind of working here in tandem. So you've got deck building, and it plays like many deck builders where you're going to have a 5-card starting hand. You'll be able to play those cards during your turn, and then at the end of your turn, you'll draw up 5 cards for your next turn. It is also a worker placement game, as you can see with all the locations around the board. I'm not going to explain every single location, specifically, but I will kind of talk about them in general. And then the last thing is an area control game that's going on down here. And this feels like a lot of other games that kind of had a central conflict every round, like let's say Game of Thrones, the board game. And so I'm going to talk about each of those 3 mechanisms a little bit and what makes it different in this game. But I'm not going to be doing a full teach. I'm not going to explain everything in the game because I don't think you need to know that to know if this game looks good to you. I'm just going to try to go over the most important points. So first of all, let's talk about the deck building. Everyone's going to start out with a hand of cards, or I should say 10 starting cards. You're going to have a signet ring, seek allies, a reconnaissance card, 2 Dune, the desert planet cards, a diplomacy card, 2 daggers, and 2 convincing arguments. And in general, when you play any of these cards, and let me show you a sample hand. So if I was starting the game, I would have, 5 cards. You're going to start the game with 2 workers. There is a 3rd worker over here you will be able to get in the game once you go to this space for the very first time. This will cost 8 coins to go to, and you'll get that 3rd worker. Until you get that 3rd worker, you're only going to have 2 workers to use. And the workers are basically triggered off of the cards that you played. So you're going to have 5 cards in a hand normally, and you will play a card to activate the gray power and to place a worker on the board. And the worker can go to any of the icons that are on that specific card. Now, as you can see, none of these starting cards have a gray power. One of the only examples in the starting set of 10 cards is the Signet Ring. And if you play that card, you'll be able to do that ability that's specific to your faction or your player. But if you look over at all these cards here, this is the market, and you're going to be buying these cards as the game goes on. And so all of these cards pretty much are going to have powers in this gray area. So for instance, if you played this card as one of those cards that you're playing at the beginning of your turn, you would get to draw another card from your draw pile into your hand. So almost all of these have those abilities, have those powers on this gray one, on this gray section of the card. But when you start the game, your starting cards mostly do not. It just means that you need to power up and get better cards. But you will be playing one card and placing a worker out on the board in one of these locations that you have an icon for. So if you play the diplomacy card, you can go to any of these 4 faction areas on the board. If you play a Dune the Desert Planet card, you can only go to the yellow areas, which are basically these areas that give you spice, and these other areas up here that allow you to get either 3 money for free, or you're paying a certain amount of spice and converting it into money. It's called Solari. This card, if I play this, it's going to only let me go to the blue locations, which are these locations here. And these are kind of a whole grab bag of rewards, from drawing more cards to getting these little intrigue cards over here. And these usually have either endgame scoring or one-time effects. For instance, this one says you recall one of your agents. So if you recall one of your agents, that means you'll get an extra worker placement turn that round, because you'll get to place that agent again. And the other area here are the green, this green area. And this area generally has to do with long-term effects. So this one will let you put 4 more cubes into your garrison. This is how you get your extra worker. This one will give you persuasion. Persuasion is how you buy these cards. And a cube into your area. This space right here is a little bit of an oddity, because you pay 2 and you get an extra card. So it's kind of a trade-off. And you'll take this worker. But going here costs a worker. So it's kind of a net nothing, right? Because you're paying a worker and you're getting a worker. You're also paying 2 money and getting a card. But the reason that you would do this is that a lot of time in this conflict here, you don't really know what you want to do until the end of the round. And so by spending a worker here to take this worker and then being able to play that worker later, it gives you the opportunity normally to go last in the round. So it gives you the opportunity to know what everybody else has done before you take your turn. And thematically, this character, the Mentat in Dune, is this kind of like race of people that are sort of human calculators, and they can calculate all the possible things that could happen. So thematically, when you go here, you're kind of using this Mentat to calculate all the possible board situations and give you the last action, to give you the action that takes advantage of that late board game state in that round, so that then you can hopefully make a choice that's going to help in terms of the conflict. So these are some of the worker placement actions. But anyway, that's how that works. You're going to play a card, you're going to get to do the gray power once you have cards with gray powers, and you'll place an agent on one of these spaces. So you'll do that once, you'll do that twice. Like I said, you only have 2 workers at the start. And then when it comes around to you again, what you're going to do is you're going to cash out the rest of your cards, and you're going to do that for the blue value. So for instance, each of these would give me 1 persuasion, which I then would take into my buy phase, and I'd be able to buy cards here that, you know, are up to 3 persuasion. So for instance, I could buy this card, or maybe I could buy this card and that card. So the card market in Dune works like many other deck builders, where when you buy a card, you do immediately replace it. So if you're buying multiple cards in one turn, you're going to get to see what comes out. It's not a case where you buy things and then it refreshes at the end of your turn. No. Each card will replace itself as you take it, and then you'll still have 5 cards to choose from for your next buy if you want to continue buying cards. So that is how the deck building part works, okay? I've already talked a little bit about some of these spaces. These green ones, for instance, like the Mentat. This space here, you're going to pay 5 Solari to go to. You can only do this once in the game. And when you do, you're going to place a little cylinder here. And that means that you will always have an additional 2 persuasion when you go to the buy phase. Most of these spaces have to do with getting the game's 3 resources, which are spice, the orange resources, water, the blue, and Solari, which is money. Let's talk about conflict. So every player is going to start out with 3 of these cubes in their garrison, and the rulebook recommends that you just use the circle closest to wherever you're sitting. And every round, you're going to turn over 1 of these conflict cards, and by the end of the round, you're going to resolve this conflict, and the winner will get the top reward. And, if you have a lot of players, second place will get this reward, third place will get that reward. But to be in the conflict, you actually have to have your troops, which is what these cubes represent, in this conflict area. So there are several worker placement spaces out on this board that have this same icon on the spaces. They look like crossed swords. So here, 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 and down here, and this one. Now, whenever you go to one of these spaces with the crosses on it, if there are either troops that are reward for the space, or if there's a troop on the card that you're using to play that agent, you will get to place that many troops either in your garrison or out here in the conflict space. If you go to a space with the X on it, you will be able to place those troops out into the conflict space. So for instance, if I go here, which has this space, and I get 5 troops and 2 water, I can place all 5 of these troops out into the conflict space. Now, whenever you place cubes out into this conflict space, you'll also be able to move over an additional 2 troops from the garrison into that conflict space. So for here, I would get to place 5, and I could move over as many as 2 if I had 2 more in here. People will be doing this during the worker placement phase. And then at the end of that, after they've all completed their worker phase and they've completed their buy phase, you'll move into the conflict phase in which this will be resolved. So for the conflict phase, every cube out here is going to count as 2 combat, and then players will do things throughout the game to increase their combat bonuses using their little tokens. And so you're going to add on that number to your troops. So for instance, if it looked like this at the conflict phase, let's say that's there, the green player is going to score 4 points for their 2 troops, plus 2 for a total of 6, whereas the red player will score 2 points for their 1 troop, because they're 2 points each, plus 6 for their combat bonus for a total of 8. And in this case, the red player would win the conflict, take the reward, and then at the end of the phase, all the cubes that were in the conflict will go back off the board into the player's supply. So that is the area majority part of the game that kind of uses this conflict system every round with combat. Now, the last kind of major element in this game are this victory point track. And victory points are kind of hard won in this game. Essentially, they're going to come from later conflicts. Usually the first place reward will be a victory point. Also, as you're going up these reputation tracks, whenever you move up and you go into the second space, you're going to score a victory point. Also, if you move up to this 4th space, you'll get the reward and you'll take this alliance token and you'll get the victory point on that token. Now, if someone else comes up this track later and passes you, this victory point, this alliance token with victory point, will change ownership. And when it does so, the red player would lose a victory point and the green player would gain that victory point. So you're going to gain victory points from these reputation tracks and from winning conflicts, and then from these Spice Must Flow cards. So these can also be bought when you're doing your buying phase for persuasion. As you can see, these cards are expensive. They are hard to come by because you need 9 persuasion at the end of the round. So this space is a good space to help with this. But whenever you buy one of these cards, you're going to get a victory point as well. And that's the main reason to buy these, because as you see, they have no gray power, so they can't be activated when you're using them for a worker. What you'll want to do is put them out at the end of your turn, and you'll get a spice for each of these cards. That's not super helpful, so the main reason you're doing it is to buy these victory points. And then occasionally you'll get end of game scoring cards from the intrigue deck that will have some goal, like maybe they'll have something saying if you have at least 2 of these cards, at the end of the game you'll get an additional victory point, and if you have more of them than any other players each have, you'll also get a victory point. So those are the main ways to score points, and this game is generally deck building, worker placement, and area majority with this conflict. And it's also a victory point race. So that is Dune Imperium in a nutshell. So it is a very interesting combination of those 3 mechanics: the deck building, the worker placement, and the area majority. And it's a very solid game. I've played it once at 2-player, and if you played at 2-player, you need a 3rd player kind of AI dummy. And I've also played it solo, and if you play it solo, you need 2 AI dummies. We're still isolating ourselves as much as we can. So I haven't played it at a higher player count, but I think it will play very well at higher player counts, especially with the conflict area. That's going to get pretty heated, I think, in larger player counts. Already, it's kind of preceding itself with this big reputation. It was already on a lot of critics' top 10 lists for 2020 before the game had even really landed. So I think people are seeing it on these top 10 lists, top 20 lists, before they've even had a chance to really acquire the game and play it for themselves. So I'm imagining that there's a lot of expectation for this one. And it is a really, really, really good game. I don't know if it's going to quite be the second coming that people maybe want it to be, but it is a really, really solid game and a great combination of those 3 kind of central mechanics. And I really like it, and I look forward to playing it a lot at a lot of player counts. I had thought from hearing about the game myself that it was going to be a lot more complicated and a lot more to it than it is. And while it does have solid, mechanisms and it has some good gameplay in it, it's really not that complicated. There's some of that iconography that takes a little bit of a hump to get over. And if you don't know, the Dune lore, I suppose that could be a little bit intimidating. But you need to play it and just get past that, because after a play or 2, everything's going to make sense, and it really plays like a not that complicated game. I think if you were to look it up on Board Game Geek, you'll find that it's coming in as a medium-heavy game, probably right in the middle of that medium-heavy range. And for a medium-heavy game, I think it plays on the light side. So I think the rating that it's sitting on at Board Game Geek right now, and that complexity level, I think over time as people play it and they become a little, less, intimidated by it maybe, I think you're going to see that rating on BGG come down. It's probably going to end up right on that line kind of between medium light and medium heavy. There are great choices to be made in Dune Imperium, and it's a fun game to play, and it's a compelling game to play. I would rate it very, very highly. I am anticipating doing a full teach and review at some point, perhaps not too far in the future. So if that's something that you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments below. I know that you can go through Direwolf Publishing, which is the company that's publishing it, and get an upgrade pack for Dune Imperium that gives you a lot of miniatures and stuff like that. I'm not sure if that's something that people are that aware of right now, so I'm going to just put up a picture of it so you can see what it looks like. That might be something you want to consider in the future. So here it is. The only thing about this is that the game board is relatively small. It's not a huge game board. It's not going to take up an entire table. And so I'm not sure all these minis, which are, some of them are going to replace those little cubes that you put in the garrisons. So I think either they're maybe a little smaller than they look from this picture, or I don't know if there's plans for the future to make a bigger board or like some kind of neoprene playmat or something. But they do look really cool, and it's something I'll probably be looking at in the future as well. So, but just, I haven't seen people advertise this, so just to know that this is something that you can get right now. It's on pre-order. I don't know how or when it's going to come to retail, but you can get it right now. So that's another supplement for a game that is already a great game. If this is your first time at the channel, this is the first video that you've watched here, you might want to consider subscribing. Also, likes are always great. You can like this video, and comments are good too. So if there's anything you'd like further information about, or if you'd like to specifically request that I get a full review and teach up for this thing sooner rather than later, just let me know. And thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.